For centuries, a chilling legend has haunted the darkest corners of the forest and the quietest villages. They speak in hushed tones about Silbón, the whistler, a restless spirit who roams the earth with a sound that chills the very bones of those who hear it. He is a shadow of vengeance, a phantom that marks the guilty with his haunting tune, bringing terror to anyone unlucky enough to encounter him. Long ago, a man named Antonio lived in a small, isolated village nestled on the edge of a vast forest. Antonio's family had a reputation for cruelty, but he always tried to be different. Though his bloodline carried a dark history, Antonio sought a peaceful life, trying to escape the sins of his ancestors. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. One night, after a fierce argument with his father, Antonio's anger reached a boiling point. In a fit of rage, he committed an unforgivable act. He took his father's life in the most brutal of ways. The deed was done, and a dark weight settled over him. As soon as the reality of his actions sank in, a crushing guilt filled his chest. He knew what he had done could never be undone. Terrified of the consequences, Antonio dragged the dismembered body of his father deep into the heart of the forest. He hid it among the trees, trying to erase the evidence of his crime. But in doing so, Antonio unknowingly triggered a curse that would follow him for the rest of his life. As Antonio fled the forest, seeking to escape both the guilt and the horror of his actions, he began to hear it, a soft, high-pitched whistle carried on the wind. At first, it seemed like nothing more than the rustling of leaves. But then the sound grew louder, sharper, as if something or someone was following him. His pulse quickened. The whistle wasn't natural. He turned around, but the forest was still, quiet. There was no one there. He resumed walking, his heart pounding, but the whistle continued. It grew closer, sharper, more distinct, as though whatever was making it was moving with him. It was following him. Suddenly, Antonio felt a coldness that seemed to seep into his very bones. The air became heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. And then, just as he was about to break into a run, he saw it, a figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. Silbón. The tall, skeletal figure stood before him, its long, bony arms dangling at its sides. Its face was obscured, but the darkness around it seemed to swallow the moonlight. The air around Antonio grew cold, suffocating, and he felt as if he were being pulled into the very depths of the earth. Silbón's presence was terrifying, suffocating, like a shadow that hung over everything. The whistling stopped abruptly, and in the stillness, Silbón's voice cut through the air, a deep, gravelly rasp that seemed to come from the depths of the forest itself. "You should not have done this." Antonio froze. His legs felt like they were made of stone. He wanted to run, to scream, but his body wouldn't obey. He tried to call out, but his voice was swallowed by the dense silence of the forest. Silbón stepped forward, its figure towering over him, its long, skeletal fingers reaching out toward him. For a moment, Antonio could hear nothing but the sound of his own heartbeat, thudding in his chest like a drum. And then, as if in response to his terror, the whistle began again, a sharp, shrill note that echoed through the trees. The closer Silbón came, the louder the whistle became, as if it were the spirit's signal of impending doom. Antonio's breath quickened. The whistle was death. In the blink of an eye, Silbón was upon him. The figure reached out, its cold hand wrapping around Antonio's throat, and just like that, the world went dark. The next morning, the villagers found Antonio's body by the edge of the forest. It was cold, lifeless, and there were no signs of a struggle. The only thing that remained was a faint, haunting whistle that seemed to drift through the trees.